Imagine you are sitting completely still, the passenger in a breathtakingly fast chariot. The horses are wild, pulling you through the chaotic battlefield of your everyday life. The emails, the responsibilities, the noise, the endless desires. But you are not the horses. You are not the reins. You aren't even the one driving. You are the silent, untouchable witness sitting in the back. Untouched by the dust, unaffected by the speed, perfectly at peace in the center of the storm. What if you could live every single moment of your life from that exact seat?
It is the ultimate vantage point, really.
Welcome to this deep dive. If you are with us today, you already know the territory. We aren't here to just do a surface-level summary of ancient texts. We are here to interrogate the mechanics of human action and human consciousness.
Yeah, we are getting right into the deep end today.
Exactly. Our focus today is Chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita. This is the section entirely dedicated to karma yoga, which is the yoga of action. And we're drawing heavily on the expansive, really highly technical lectures of Swami Vivekananda. He meticulously unpacks this text through the lens of Advaita Vedanta.
Right, the non-dual perspective.
And alongside that, we are looking at the 600-year-old commentary by the philosopher Madhusudana Saraswati. It's a text that bridges absolute non-dual theory with the really rigorous daily friction of lived human experience.
The central tension we are exploring today is, I'd say it's perhaps the most persistent psychological problem of the modern era. We are basically attempting to map out how a human being can exist in a state of high velocity, demanding worldly action without being consumed by the psychological friction that usually accompanies it.
Which is what we all want, right? We want the success without the burnout.
Exactly. The goal of this specific chapter of the Gita is to systematically dismantle the illusion that peace requires the cessation of action. We're looking for the architecture of absolute inner stillness functioning simultaneously alongside relentless external movement.
Okay, let's unpack this. We can bypass the basic introductory setting. We are all pretty familiar with Arjuna's paralysis on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and Krishna stepping into the role of the philosophical guide. What really demands our immediate attention is Madhusudana Saraswati's diagnosis of Arjuna's mental state at the very opening of Chapter 3.
Yeah, the setup here is crucial.
In the previous chapter, Krishna laid out the ultimate reality of jhana, the path of pure knowledge. He explained that the true self is the immortal, untouchable witness consciousness. And Arjuna's immediate reaction to this is to say, well, if action is inferior to this pure knowledge, why are you asking me to engage in this horrific war? Let me just abandon this action entirely and retreat to a life of quiet contemplation.
It sounds perfectly logical on the surface.
Right. I mean, let's interrogate that. On a purely philosophical level, if the ultimate reality is formless, actionless consciousness, why isn't Arjuna right? Why isn't retreating to a cave to meditate the most logical response to hearing the ultimate truth?
Because Arjuna is attempting what modern psychology might call a spiritual bypass.
A spiritual bypass?
Yeah. He is using the elevated language of absolute truth to mask what is actually a profound psychological crisis. Arjuna is asking for a state the text calls naishkarmya, which translates roughly to the state of transcending action entirely.
The ultimate stillness.
Right. And it is a legitimate spiritual state. It's the pinnacle of realization where the illusion of the individual doer just falls away. But Arjuna is demanding the pinnacle without having actually climbed the mountain.
He wants the shortcut.
Exactly. And Krishna immediately points out a biological and cosmic impossibility here. You cannot achieve naishkarmya simply by refusing to move your limbs. The text emphasizes that no living being can remain actionless even for a single moment.
Because of Prakriti, right?
Yes, Prakriti. Action is driven by Prakriti, the fundamental material nature of the universe. I mean, think about it. The beating of your heart, the respiration in your lungs, the firing of your synapses, even the digestion of your food.
They're all actions.
They're all actions. You are completely embedded in a kinetic universe.
So the refusal to act is, in itself, an action. It's an active suppression. But the text actually goes much further than just calling it impossible. It labels the attempt as actively destructive. Krishna introduces the concept of mithyachara. He describes the person who forcefully restrains their physical organs of action while their mind continues to dwell obsessively on the objects of the senses. And the translation often used for this is hypocrite.
It's a harsh word, but it's incredibly precise.
I do struggle with the application here, though. If someone is deeply overwhelmed by the demands of their life, say a corporate executive, and they decide to take a week to do a silent retreat, Are they living in Mithyatra simply because their mind is still racing? Is the text suggesting that any attempt at physical stillness before you have absolute mental purity is hypocritical?
That's a great question. It's really a question of intent and self-awareness. The hypocrisy Krishna is warning against is the delusion that physical proximity to stillness somehow equates to spiritual evolution.
Okay, I see.
Madhusudana Saraswati's commentary is laser-focused on this. If you abandon your necessary duties out of fear or ego or just sensory overwhelm, and you forcefully sit your body down in a cave or a modern retreat center, you have not escaped the battlefield. You've simply internalized it.
Wow, you've internalized the battlefield.
Yeah. Your mind, which has been conditioned by decades of sensory attachment, ambition, and fear, it will just replay those exact attachments on a loop. You will sit there in physical silence, but your internal reality will be absolutely deafening.
The monkey mind.
The monkey mind, exactly. You'll be sitting there mentally conquering kingdoms, nursing old grudges, indulging desires. The danger of Mithyatra is that it breeds a highly corrosive self-deception. You convince yourself you're this highly evolved ascetic, while internally you are completely enslaved by your conditioning.
That perfectly brings us to the prerequisite that this entire chapter really hinges on, which is chitta shuddhi, the purification of the mind. The core argument presented is that karma yoga, the yoga of action, is the mandatory mechanism for this purification. You just cannot leapfrog over it.
There are no shortcuts to a clean mind.
But this sounds highly paradoxical to me. If my mind is agitated by the relentless action of my career, my relationships, and my societal obligations, how does returning to that exact same sphere of action purify my mind? Doesn't more action just generate more friction, more karma, and basically just more exhaustion?
It totally sounds like a paradox until you redefine what action actually is.
Yeah.
And that paradox is exactly what Chapter 3 is designed to resolve. The text requires us to understand that action itself is completely neutral.
Neutral.
Completely neutral. It is the psychological engine driving the action that determines whether it binds you or frees you.
Okay. Elaborate on that engine.
Well, when an action is driven by a selfish desire for a specific outcome, when your internal monologue is saying, what will I get out of this? How will this enhance my status? How will this protect my fragile ego? That action generates immense psychological friction. It leaves a residue on the mind.
So it's the selfishness that causes the exhaustion, not the emails themselves.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
But karma yoga fundamentally alters that engine. It is the practice of engaging in intense, meticulous action while systematically dismantling the selfish desire for the fruit of that action. You are acting to exhaust your past conditioning, not to acquire new attachments.
The action becomes the scrubber.
Yes. The action becomes the scrubbing mechanism that cleans the mirror of the mind. And you cannot see your true reflection in a mind coated with a thick dust of selfish desire.
If we accept that action is the necessary scrubbing mechanism, we really have to look at the framework the Gita provides for how to perform that action. And this moves us right into section 2 of our deep dive. Here is where Krishna zooms out from Arjuna's individual psychological crisis and introduces a massive cosmic framework, and it's all based on the concept of yagna.
Yagna, it's a foundational concept.
The sources note that the concept of yagna, which translates roughly to sacrifice or offering, was actually established at the very dawn of creation. The Creator brought forth beings along with the spirit of yagna, stating that this would be the mechanism for their prosperity and fulfillment. But let's examine that translation of sacrifice, because to a modern ear, sacrifice implies a painful loss. It implies deprivation, or maybe some ancient ritual involving fire and offerings. How are we supposed to map a prehistoric ritual concept onto a modern, hyper-rational understanding of our existence?
You do it by understanding that the ritual fire was always just a physical metaphor for a profound ecological and societal truth. Yagna is basically the ancient articulation of absolute interdependence.
Interdependence.
Yeah, the text lays out a very clear causal chain. Living beings are sustained by food. Food is produced by rain. Rain is generated by the cosmic order, by yagna, and yagna is born of prescribed action.
It's an ancient ecosystem model.
That's exactly what it is. It's describing a closed-loop system of universal circulation. Nothing in the natural world exists for its own extraction. Think about it. The sun does not hoard its light. The river does not drink its own water. The tree does not consume its own fruit.
Everything is giving.
Everything functions as an offering to the broader system, and in return, the system sustains the individual component. So yagna is the recognition that human beings are not these solitary, independent entities just overlaid onto the universe. We are deeply embedded nodes within this continuous cycle of exchange.
And the text issues a really severe indictment of anyone who ignores this cycle. It states that if you take from this cosmic cycle, if you enjoy the sunlight, the oxygen, the infrastructure of society, all the knowledge passed down by previous generations, and you utilize all of it purely for your own sensory gratification without offering anything back, you are, quote, a thief.
A thief, it's a very heavy accusation.
It's incredibly heavy language. It frames selfish living not just as a psychological error, but as a literal cosmic crime. It feels to me like an ancient warning against the exact hyper-extractive, consumer-driven culture that basically defines the modern world right now.
Oh, absolutely. It is a devastating critique of the extraction mindset. When a human being operates solely on the principle of, what can I extract from this situation or this relationship or this planet for my own exclusive benefit, they create a massive blockage in the cosmic circulation.
They stop the flow.
They do. And the psychological consequence of being a thief in this cosmic sense is deep alienation and profound sorrow. The text says that those who cook food only for themselves eat only sin.
I love that line.
It's so powerful. And obviously, it isn't about the literal act of cooking a meal for one. It's a metaphor for the hoarding of energy.
Okay.
When you isolate yourself from the cycle of yagna, your life just becomes a vanity project.
But when you reorient.
Exactly. When you reorient your actions, whether you were writing code, raising a child, sweeping a floor, managing a team, if you view it as your specific contribution to this massive interdependent web, the action completely ceases to be a burden. It becomes an offering. The friction disappears because the isolated ego is no longer the center of gravity.
This reorientation of action brings up a really logical conundrum, which brings us to section 3, the enlightened actor. Because if the entire purpose of performing karma yoga is to purify the mind, achieving citta shuddhi, and the purified mind then realizes the ultimate truth of the self, achieving jivanmukti.
Liberation while living.
Right, liberation while living. What happens the day after enlightenment? The text makes it very clear that the enlightened being has absolutely nothing left to gain in the three worlds. They have no karma left to burn, they have no mind left to purify, and zero desires to fulfill. So why wouldn't they retreat to the cave at that point? Why do the sources insist that the enlightened continue to work, and sometimes they work harder than anyone else?
This is where we encounter the beautiful concept of loka sangraha,
Loka sangraha.
which means acting for the welfare and cohesion of the world. The enlightened individual acts purely out of unadulterated compassion. Krishna actually uses his own incarnation as the ultimate proof of this.
Right, he talks about his own role.
He explains that as the Supreme Lord, he has no unfulfilled desires. He has no duties. He is compelled to perform by karma and literally nothing to achieve. Yet he is continuously engaged in action. And the reasoning he provides is sociological. He says whatever a great man does, ordinary people follow. Whatever standard he sets, the world follows.
Setting the precedent.
Yes. If the enlightened beings, the ones who have actually seen the ultimate reality, simply checked out of society, the masses would entirely misinterpret their inaction. The ignorant would look at them and say, well, the wisest among us do not perform their duties, therefore duty is meaningless. It would lead to the total disintegration of society.
The commentary provides a really vivid illustration of this through a parable told by the 19th century mystic Sri Ramakrishna. I think it perfectly captures the different tiers of spiritual realization. Let me lay this out.
Please do. It's a great story.
So the parable describes 3 friends who discover a massive, insurmountable wall. And they hear the sounds of unimaginable joy and celebration coming from the other side. The first friend manages to scale the wall, looks over, sees the ultimate reality, and just immediately jumps over, completely abandoning the world.
He's gone.
Gone. Then the second friend follows suit, scaling the wall, seeing the bliss, and disappearing into the joy on the other side. But the third friend scales the wall, sees the exact same absolute reality, experiences the exact same bliss, but he refuses to jump.
That's the turning point.
Instead, he turns his back on the ultimate liberation, looks down at the suffering, confused people in the world, and climbs back down to become a teacher.
And that third friend is the archetype of the karma yogi that the Bhagavad Gita holds up as the absolute supreme ideal.
Because he comes back.
Yes.
Yeah.
The first 2 friends achieved liberation, absolutely, but their liberation did not benefit the world. The third friend represents the avatar, the bodhisattva, the truly compassionate teacher. When a person like this returns to the world, their actions are absolutely flawless.
Flawless because there's no ego.
Exactly. The distorting lens of the ego has been completely removed. When you have absolutely nothing to gain and nothing to lose, your actions become a pure, unobstructed conduit for the welfare of the universe.
But the text also provides a very strict behavioral guideline for these enlightened leaders regarding how they actually interact with those of us who are still caught in the illusion of the ego. It introduces this distinction between the akritsnavid, which is the partial knower, the person who believes they are purely their physical body and their desires, and the kritsnavid, the knower of the whole.
The enlightened master.
Right. And the rule is that the wise should not unsettle the minds of the ignorant. They shouldn't create confusion by prematurely dropping absolute non-dual truths onto a mind that is entirely unpurified. So let's ground this in reality. If an enlightened master encounters a highly ambitious, materialistic individual, someone whose entire identity is wrapped up in wealth accumulation and status, what is the actual danger of telling them, hey, none of this is real, you are the immortal soul, abandon your ambition?
The danger is immense. You will shatter their operating system without providing a functional replacement. This brings up the concept of the upward push.
The upward push.
Yeah. If you tell a deeply materialistic person that their wealth and their status are just illusions, and let's say they actually believe you before their mind is purified, they won't suddenly achieve naishkarmya. They won't become peaceful.
They'll just crash.
They will fall straight into nihilism.
Yeah.
They will lose all their motivation to act, but they will still retain all of their internal desires. You have effectively turned them into the hypocrite we talked about earlier, the mithyachara. They'll be sitting in physical lethargy while their mind just roasts in unfulfilled ambition.
So what does the compassionate teacher do instead?
The compassionate teacher does not tell the ambitious person to stop working. They tell him to keep working, but they subtly shift the intent. They say, use your immense drive to create wealth, but distribute it equitably. Build your empire, but ensure your employees thrive. Perform your duties meticulously, but just begin to detach a little bit from your obsession with the outcome.
You hijack their existing momentum.
Exactly. You take the momentum they already possess, and you angle it slightly upward. You turn their worldly ambition into the very karma yoga that will eventually purify their mind.
This precise mechanism of angling the momentum upward brings us to the absolute core of this deep dive. Section 4 revolves entirely around verse 30, which Madhusudana Saraswati and Swami Vivekananda both identify as the master blueprint for karma yoga.
It is the pinnacle verse.
If there is a formula for achieving the state of the silent passenger in that fast-moving chariot we talked about at the start, this is it. Krishna tells Arjuna, surrender all actions to me. With your mind intent on the self, freeing yourself from longing and selfishness, fight unperturbed by grief. Let's dissect this systematically, starting with the very first command. Mayi sarvani karmani sannyasya.
Surrendering all actions to a higher reality.
Right, surrendering to the Supreme. What is the actual psychological function of this surrender? Like if I am sitting at my desk writing a complex legal brief, how do I surrender that action?
The psychological function is the active removal of the ego as the primary beneficiary of the action. When you write that legal brief, the standard default operational mode is to think, I am writing this to win the case, so I can secure my promotion, so I can validate my intellect.
Me.
Exactly. The energy is flowing inward, crystallizing the ego. Surrendering the action means recognizing that your intellect, your education, the language you are using, the literal energy sustaining your body, all of it is borrowed from the cosmic cycle of Yanga.
You don't own any of it.
You don't. You perform the action meticulously because it is your prescribed duty in that exact moment, but you mentally offer the effort back to the universe. It is a continuous internal realignment. It prevents the ego from claiming ownership of the universe's energy.
The second component of the formula is adhyatmacitasa, which requires the mind to be fixed on the self or maintaining a spiritual consciousness. Now, this seems to demand a really intense dual processing capability. You have to be deeply immersed in the technical details of the worldly task drafting the brief, while simultaneously holding this meta-awareness that you are not the doer, but the immortal witness. How does anyone cultivate that without becoming entirely distracted from the task at hand?
It feels like a distraction until you realize it's less about dual processing and more about just redefining your core identity. I mean, we all hold multiple identities simultaneously without any confusion.
True.
You can be a professional, a parent, and a citizen at the exact same time. Adhyatmacitasa means making your absolute foundational identity that of a spiritual seeker. If your foundational identity is corporate executive, then a market crash is a literal existential threat. It destroys who you are.
Because that's your whole world.
Right. But if your foundational identity is immortal consciousness and your temporary prescribed role is corporate executive, then a market crash is simply the current curriculum you are required to navigate. You navigate it with maximum effort and skill, but it does not touch your core reality. The external world ceases to be a threat and it just becomes a training ground.
That reframing leads directly into the third component, which is nirashir nirmamo, acting without desire, which is nirashir, and without the sense of mind, which is nirmamo. I really want to look closely at the linguistic breakdown of this concept provided in the commentary because I found it fascinating. The text points out a profound difference between the Sanskrit word for mine, which is mama, and the phrase for not mine, which is na mama.
It is a brilliant piece of linguistic philosophy. The commentary essentially states that the two syllables of mine, mama, are the mechanism of death and bondage.
Death and bondage.
Yes. While the three syllables of not mine, na mama, are the mechanism of eternal freedom. When you look at the world and apply the label mama, my house, my title, my reputation, my children, you are taking your infinite, immortal self and forcefully binding it to objects that are finite, fragile, and subject to constant change.
You're tethering the infinite to the temporary.
Exactly. You are anchoring your peace to things that the universe guarantees will eventually decay or disappear. That friction right there, between your desire for permanence and the world's actual impermanence, is the exact definition of suffering.
So how does na mama fix it?
By inserting the negation, na mama, not mine, you sever the anchor. You acknowledge that you have been entrusted with a family, a career, and a body to care for temporarily, but you do not possess them. They belong to Prakriti. They belong to nature.
And when you sever that anchor, you achieve the final component of verse 30, which I think is perhaps the most desirable psychological state imaginable. Vigata javaraha. Translated, it means free from fever or acting without mental agitation. Taking the ultimate cosmic chill pill.
The chill pill of spirituality.
Right. But I do want to challenge this. So much of human progress, ambition, and creativity seems to be driven by that exact fever. The anxiety of failure, the burning desire to prove oneself, the stress of a deadline. These are incredibly powerful engines. If you completely cure the fever, if you truly operate with a cool internal engine, do you lose the drive to achieve anything significant in the world? Does Vaigata Javarha just lead to mediocrity?
That is always the ultimate fear of the ego, but it is a fundamental misunderstanding of how energy works. The fever of anxiety and selfish ambition is actually an incredibly inefficient engine. It consumes vast amounts of psychological energy through worry, projection, and self-doubt.
That's where the burnout comes from.
Exactly. It causes immense burnout.
Yeah.
When you operate in the state of Vigata Javarha, you are not devoid of energy. You're devoid of friction. Imagine a massive machine running with unlubricated gears. It generates immense heat and noise, and it eventually just destroys itself. That is action driven by ego.
Lots of noise, lots of heat.
Wow. Right. Now imagine that exact same machine running with perfect lubrication. It is silent, it is cool, and it is capable of operating at infinitely higher speeds without any degradation. When you act without the fever of anxiety regarding the outcome, 100% of your cognitive and physical energy is available for the action itself.
So they actually perform better.
Vastly better. The karma yogi does not perform worse than the ambitious egoist. Their vision is clear and their endurance is practically limitless.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. The removal of friction rather than the reduction of speed. But implementing this flawless karma yoga requires us to actually confront the reality of our own psychological conditioning. Which brings us to section 5, the trap of human nature. Krishna introduces a really stark dose of realism here.
He really brings it down to earth.
He differentiates between swarupa, which is our ultimate divine nature as pure consciousness, and swabhava, also called prakriti in this context, which is our conditioned psychological nature. This swabhava is the accumulation of our past actions, our genetic predispositions, our upbringing, our deep-seated tendencies. And verse 33 contains a line that can feel almost fatalistic upon first reading. Krishna states, even the wise act according to their own nature. Beings follow nature. What can repression do?
It's a heavy question.
It is. If I am deeply conditioned to be anxious or aggressive or lazy, and the text says beings follow nature, is Krishna giving me an excuse? Is he basically saying I am hardwired and cannot change?
He is absolutely not providing an excuse. He is providing a very tactical assessment of the battlefield. The text is warning against the futility of brute force repression. If you have a deeply ingrained psychological tendency, simply deciding you will forcefully crush it through pure willpower is destined to fail.
And it just goes underground.
Exactly. Suppressed nature does not disappear. It pressurizes. It gets pushed into the subconscious, where it mutates and eventually explodes in highly destructive ways. I mean, modern psychoanalysis is built entirely on this exact premise, but the Gita articulated it thousands of years ago.
The sources illustrate the proper response to our conditioned nature through a really famous incident in the life of Swami Vivekananda. Let's talk about the monkeys in Varanasi.
Oh, the monkey story is perfect for this.
So he was walking in Varanasi when he was suddenly targeted by a large, aggressive troop of monkeys. His instinctual reaction, his immediate conditioning was fear, so he began to run. But the moment he ran, the monkeys became more aggressive and chased him faster.
Right. He was literally running from his own rising panic, and the external world was just amplifying it.
And then an older monk, who was watching the whole scene unfold, shouted a single command at him.
Face the brute.
Face the brute.
The monk yelled, "Stop," and face the brute. Vivekananda stopped running, turned around, and faced the aggressive monkeys. And the moment he stood his ground, the monkeys halted, backed away, and eventually just scattered.
The metaphorical implication there is so profound. The monkeys are your swabhava. They are your conditioning, your past karma. You cannot outrun them, and you cannot simply wish them out of existence. You have to stop, turn around, and confront the reality of your own nature.
You have to understand your unique psychological makeup deeply. And once you understand that makeup, you have to apply the concept of swadharma, which translates to your own prescribed duty or path. Krishna delivers a very sharp warning regarding how we utilize our nature. He says, better is one's own duty, swadharma, though devoid of merit, than the duty of another, paradharma, well discharged. Better is death in one's own duty. The duty of another is fraught with fear.
Let's really unpack the danger of paradharma, because we see this constantly in the modern spiritual and professional landscape. Someone with a highly dynamic, extroverted, aggressive intellect reads a biography of a silent contemplative monk and decides, oh, that is the ultimate spiritual path. I must force myself into a life of silent asceticism. They are trying to adopt someone else's nature.
And it is an act of extreme violence against the self. That dynamic, extroverted individual will suffer immensely in forced silence. Their mind will tear itself apart because they are engaging in paradharma.
So what's the solution for them?
The wisdom of the Gita is to take whatever your swabhava is and subjugate it to the process of karma yoga. If your nature is aggressive and organizational, do not pretend to be a quiet mystic. Be a dynamic organizer, but organize for the welfare of the world, for lokasangraha, rather than for your own ego.
Use what you have.
Yes, you take your specific, flawed, conditioned nature, and you use it as the exact fuel for your own purification. You do not need to change your personality to achieve liberation. You just need to change the intent behind your personality.
It is radical self-acceptance weaponized for radical self-transformation. I love that. But even with this brilliant framework of swadharma and karma yoga, Arjuna asks the question that serves as the foundation for Section 6. And it is arguably the most relatable, agonizing question of the human experience. Arjuna essentially says, I understand the theory, I know what I should do, but what is the force that compels a person to commit acts they know are wrong, as if they are being dragged by force against their own will?
Why do we sabotage ourselves?
Exactly. Why do we sabotage ourselves? Why do we break our commitments? Why do we constantly act out of alignment with our own intellect?
Krishna does not offer a complex, multivariable psychological theory here. He points to a single devastating root cause. He says it is desire, kama. It is anger, krodha, born of the mode of passion, all-devouring and greatly sinful. Know this to be the enemy here.
Desire and anger. But the commentary makes a really crucial clarification here, right? Desire and anger are not two separate enemies.
No, they aren't. Anger is simply mutated desire. When a desire arises and is obstructed by an external force or a person, the psychological energy of that desire instantly transforms into anger toward the obstruction. Therefore, the singular root of all human self-sabotage is kama, unchecked, egoic desire.
The text describes how this desire infiltrates and obscures our wisdom using three distinct, incredibly vivid metaphors. And the commentary points out that these aren't just poetic variations. They actually map onto three different levels of spiritual ignorance, or three different types of human conditioning. Let's go through them. The first metaphor states that desire obscures wisdom just as smoke hides a fire.
Right. The metaphor of smoke and fire applies to the relatively pure or sattvic mind. Think about a fire covered by smoke. The heat and the light are still perceptible. You know the fire is there, and a slight breeze can clear the smoke immediately.
So it's a temporary block.
Yes, this represents a person who generally possesses spiritual clarity and ethical grounding, but who occasionally falls prey to a fleeting desire. Their wisdom isn't destroyed, it is just temporarily veiled. As soon as the desire passes, or as soon as they apply a little bit of self-reflection, their clarity just returns.
Okay, the second metaphor states that desire covers wisdom just as dust covers a mirror.
This applies to the passionate or rajasic mind, and honestly, this is the state most modern people find themselves in. When a mirror is covered in a thick layer of dust, it completely loses its ability to reflect reality. You cannot see yourself at all. And unlike smoke, a gentle breeze will not clear the dust.
You actually have to work at it.
You have to work at it. It requires physical friction. You must actively scrub the mirror. This represents the individual whose mind is so thickly coated with ambitions, anxieties, and constant sensory craving that their spiritual nature is entirely invisible to them. They require the vigorous, sustained scrubbing mechanism of karma yoga, intense, selfless action over a long period just to remove the accumulation of desire.
And the third metaphor is definitely the most severe. It states that desire envelopes wisdom just as a womb covers an embryo.
This applies to the deeply ignorant or tamasic mind. An embryo in the womb is completely encased in darkness. It has no freedom of movement, and more importantly, it has zero awareness that a world even exists outside of its dark enclosure. Furthermore, the embryo cannot free itself. It requires a systemic, massive transformation, the process of birth, to escape.
Complete lack of awareness.
Complete. This is the condition of a soul entirely suffocated by base, instinctual desires and deep delusion. They do not even possess the awareness that they are trapped. They require a radical awakening to even begin the process of purification.
The text continues its dissection of desire by giving it a terrifying title. Mahashana, the Great Eater. It is described as an unquenchable fire. And the sources use an analogy here that I think perfectly diagnoses the modern condition. They say trying to satisfy desire by feeding it worldly objects is like trying to put out a blazing fire by pouring ghee clarified butter right onto it.
The brilliant image.
We live in a culture entirely structured around the premise that if you just acquire the right object or achieve the right status or find the right partner, the fire of desire will finally be extinguished and you will be at peace. But the Gita argues that acquiring the object is just pouring ghee on the fire. You get a momentary burst of satisfaction, a flare-up, but the fire ultimately grows larger and demands more fuel. It is the original description of the hedonic treadmill.
Yeah, the illusion of desire is that it always promises peace upon fulfillment. If I just get this promotion, I will finally relax. But the architecture of desire is expansive. The exact moment the promotion is secured, the mind immediately projects a new condition for peace. Now I need the corner office. Now I need the lake house.
It never ends.
Never. Krishna is telling Arjuna that you cannot defeat the enemy by negotiating with it or by feeding it. You can only defeat it by understanding its mechanics and attacking its strongholds, which leads us to the strategic blueprint in the final verses of the chapter.
Which brings us to section 7, the Chariot Strategy. If desire is this unquenchable, all-consuming fire, we have to talk about containment and eradication. Krishna points out that before you can defeat an enemy, you must know exactly where it hides. He identifies 3 specific strongholds where desire embeds itself: the senses, the mind, and the intellect.
To map this out, the sources draw upon one of the most famous and vital metaphors in all of Vedic literature, which actually originates from the Katha Upanishad, the chariot metaphor.
Let's build this structure meticulously because it really is the operational map of human consciousness.
Okay, so the metaphor visualizes the human being as a chariot assembly. First, you have the horses pulling the chariot. The horses represent the senses, your vision, hearing, taste, touch, smell. They are the mechanisms of interaction, constantly pulling outward toward the objects of the world.
The raw input.
Exactly. Second, you have the reins, which connect the horses to the driver. The reins represent the mind. The mind is the processing center. It gathers the sensory input, experiences emotions, and relays the pull of the horses. Third, you have the driver holding the reins. The driver represents the intellect, the buddhi. This is the faculty of discrimination, judgment, decision-making.
And the fourth part.
Finally, you have the passenger sitting silently in the back of the chariot. The passenger is the Atman, the true self, the immortal, actionless witness consciousness.
Okay, so if the enemy, desire, has infiltrated the horses, meaning the senses, the reins, the mind, and the driver, the intellect, how do we launch a counterattack? Where is the actual point of intervention? Krishna provides a very strict hierarchy of control. He says you must start from the outside in. Therefore, O Arjuna, controlling the senses at the outset, kill this evil being, the destroyer of knowledge and realization.
It's a tactical progression.
It demands sensory discipline as the mandatory first step, and I think we often try to skip this. We want to achieve mental peace while simultaneously binge-watching toxic media, doom-scrolling through outrage-inducing content, and overindulging in food and drink. We basically want the reins to be perfectly still while we deliberately whip the wild horses into an absolute frenzy.
It's a profound structural error. You cannot out-meditate an undisciplined sensory diet. The text is unambiguous here. You must establish control over the horses first. You must be deeply intentional about what you allow your eyes to see, your ears to hear, and your mouth to consume. If the horses are running wild toward a cliff, the driver cannot calmly analyze the scenery.
That makes perfect sense. First diet, media, environment, then what?
Once the senses are reasonably disciplined, once the horses are brought to a manageable trot, then the battle moves inward to the reins. You must focus and steady the mind. You stop the mind from endlessly replaying past resentments or projecting future anxieties.
And when the mind is steady, the driver, the intellect, can finally see the road clearly. You clarify the intellect with spiritual wisdom. You use the buddhi to continuously discriminate between the eternal and the temporary, constantly reminding yourself, I am not these passing emotions, I am not these worldly outcomes. But how does the intellect actually deliver the final lethal blow to desire? The text says that you conquered the enemy by knowing him who is superior to the intellect.
This is the ultimate, non-dual resolution to the problem of desire.
The kill shot.
The kill shot, exactly. The intellect, no matter how sharp, is still part of the material apparatus. It is still part of Prakriti. To permanently eradicate desire, the driver must turn around and look at the passenger. The intellect must realize the absolute truth of the Atman.
Why does that realization instantly annihilate desire, though?
Because desire is fundamentally rooted in a sense of lack. You desire things because you feel incomplete, and you believe the external object will somehow complete you. But the Atman is infinite. It is boundless and eternally fulfilled. When the intellect finally comprehends that you are the Atman, that you are the infinite reality, the very foundation of desire just collapses.
Because there's nothing left to want.
Precisely. If you realize that you are the entire ocean, it becomes logically impossible to desire a single drop of water. The desire doesn't need to be repressed. It simply evaporates in the light of ultimate completeness.
That is the staggering conclusion of the yoga of action. We have traveled from the paralyzing anxiety of Arjuna on the battlefield, through the cosmic interdependence of yagna, past the rigorous mechanics of selfless action and the trap of our own conditioning, all the way to the realization of the infinite passenger within. We've learned that the solution to the overwhelm of the modern world is not to run away to a mountain cave. True peace is not the absence of external friction, it is the absence of internal ego. You can remain exactly where you are, right in the center of the storm, but by taking the cosmic perspective, by dropping the illusion of mind, and by acting purely as an instrument of the universe, you transform the battlefield into the very vehicle of your liberation.
It is a complete inversion of how we typically approach life. And I want to leave you with a final thought to ground this ancient philosophy into your immediate reality. Think about the most frustrating, tedious, or anxiety-inducing task waiting for you tomorrow, the conversation you are dreading, the project that feels like a massive burden, the obligation that you feel is distracting you from your real life. What if that exact task is not an obstacle to your peace? What if it is the precise, custom-designed curriculum provided by the universe to help you burn through your ego? What if changing the intent behind that single frustrating action is the exact key that unlocks the door to your ultimate freedom?
Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If this message was helpful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to us and helps us continue creating content like this. And if you believe this message could help someone you know, please don't forget to share it with them. We'd also really appreciate your honest feedback. In the comments, tell us, what are we doing right and what should we improve for future videos? Thank you again for being here. We'll see you in the next one.